Thank you for tuning into this e-learning resource on due diligence, which has been specifically created for Charity Fraud Awareness Week 2018. My name is Nick Blake. I'm the Head of Internal Audit at the Big Lottery Fund, and I'm going to talk through due diligence and partnership working. What is due diligence and why is it important? Due diligence is the process an organisation takes to avoid committing an offence or exposing itself to avoidable or unacceptable risk. The Charity Commission describes due diligence as the range of practical steps that need to be taken by trustees in order to be assured of the provenance of charitable funds and confident that the people and organisations the charity works with and able to identify and manage the associated risks. Due diligence is an important part of trustee duty and is essential in safeguarding charity assets. It involves carrying out checks on individuals and organisations that you give money to or receive money from, including your partners and other organisations you enter into a contract with. Due diligence is not an audit. Due diligence provides a level of insight into the individuals and organisations you give money to, receive money from or work with, and highlights the risks associated with those individuals or organisations, and allows you to manage those risks within your organisation's risk appetite. Trustees have ultimate responsibility for controlling and managing the affairs of the charity. To that end, they must comply with the law and act in the best interests of the charity, comply with the legal principles of duty of care and maintain control of charitable funds, ensure that the charity's funds are used properly, lawfully, and in furtherance of the charity's purposes. In practice, this means that trustees may need to implement realistic and proportionate risk management strategies to identify and mitigate significant risks to the charity's funds and assets. Although the due diligence process involves a number of different stages, it's important to remember that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to due diligence. The extent of your due diligence will depend on the nature of your risks, the activities you are carrying out, how and where you plan to deliver the activities, the timescales involved, and who will be carrying them out. So who should you conduct due diligence on? The voluntary nature of charities and their areas of work can make them vulnerable to people who want to misuse them for their own personal gain, whether by criminals for fraud, theft or money laundering purposes, or by people taking private advantage by providing services to charities that are not always on the best possible terms. The Charity Commission's Compliance Toolkit explains why it's important to perform due diligence on your donors, your partners and your beneficiaries. I think it's also important that you perform due diligence on your people. Knowing your donors. It's important for charities to know, in general terms, where the money they are being given comes from. For example, cash donations, grants, legacies and wills. Good due diligence helps you identify any risks that could arise from accepting a donation or certain types of donation. It helps to ensure that it's appropriate for you to accept money from a particular donor. It provides assurance that the donation is not from any illegal or inappropriate source and ensures that any conditions that are attached to the donation are reasonable and can be accepted. You're not expected to know the identity of each small cash donor. However, where you are in receipt of large grants, it's here that you may need to carry out more extensive due diligence to identify and verify the identity of the donor so that you can assess any risks surrounding the donor. If, for example, you have a significant donor which is an organisation, through the due diligence process, you should establish what its business is and obtain assurance that the organisation is appropriate for your charity to be involved or linked with. Carrying out due diligence on your donors will help you obtain a reasonable degree of confidence about the source of the donation and that there is no reason for you to believe it is suspicious. This is especially important if the money is coming from a business that you're not familiar with or from a country outside the United Kingdom where concerns have been raised. The due diligence process helps you identify any legal or operational reasons why you should not accept the donation and any requirements or conditions attached to the donation. It also helps you understand the intention of the donor and if they have placed any restrictions on the money. It's not your responsibility to establish if a donation is illegal or if you are being asked to use the donation for illegal purposes. However, if, during the course of your due diligence, you identify any concerns or come across any suspicious activity, then you should report these to the appropriate authority. Knowing your beneficiaries. Trustees have a duty to ensure that their charity's funds are used for its beneficiaries. Whilst this doesn't necessarily mean you always need to establish the identity of every single person, you will be expected to take more steps to check and verify their identity where access to your services or activities are restricted to a certain number or type of beneficiary. If you make regular decisions regarding which individual or group receives services or support from your charity, your due diligence should enable you to take reasonable steps to ensure that you know who those individuals or groups are. If the risk of giving funding or assistance to those individuals or groups is high, that appropriate checks are being undertaken to manage the risk, and that they are eligible to receive the funding or assistance, and that there are no concerns that they are misusing the support you are providing to them. Unfortunately, as we have seen recently with the Grenfell Tower tragedy, people abuse charities and charitable funds for making false applications for funding or assistance that they are not entitled to, or by creating beneficiaries that do not exist. Again, it's not your responsibility to investigate or decide whether there has been any criminality. Your due diligence process should enable you to take reasonable steps to satisfy yourself that your beneficiaries are genuine. If your due diligence process leads you to believe a crime has been committed, or that your funds are being used unlawfully, then you have a duty to report your concerns to the appropriate authorities. Know your partner. It is also important that you carry out due diligence on the individuals and organisations that you give grants to, or the organisations or people you use to carry out your projects and help you deliver your work. This might include gathering key details about who the partner is and the nature of their business in order to ensure they are an appropriate partner for your charity to be involved with. Your checks should be proportionate to the risks involved, and where you assess the risks to be high or more significant, then you should carry out more in-depth checks to identify and verify the identity of the partner. Your due diligence should leave you in no doubt as to the nature of their business with you. Know your people. People are your most important asset, and therefore personnel assurance is essential to your organisation's security. The high levels of trust that the public has in charities when compared to many other sectors is also reflected in the high level of trust charity trustees place on the people who work for the charity. Sadly, however, some people deliberately exploit the trust placed in them and use it for their own personal gain. Because of this, it's important you carry out due diligence on the people you select to work with, and for you to determine if the person might bring your organisation into disrepute or cause difficulties with their colleagues, trustees, beneficiaries or suppliers. Although the nature and extent of those checks should be based on an evaluation of those areas most exposed to insider risk, you must always check that the person is allowed to work in the UK and retain evidence that you have checked this. You can also request a disclosure and barring service check for certain roles. You might also want to consider whether there are any negative factors, such as theft, bullying or fraud associated with the person. In more senior roles, you might also want to establish whether the person is a good fit with your organisation, and that their attitude is consistent with your organisation's ethos. Increasingly, organisations are using online searches to help research a person's background. Although if you decide to do this, you should make it clear early on that you might conduct searches of this nature. If you do decide to access information online, you should take reasonable steps to ensure the accuracy of the information and must only access personal data insofar as it is relevant to the person's suitability for their role and relates to their personal skills, education and experience. How do you undertake due diligence? Due diligence often requires you to make subjective decisions based on qualitative information, and therefore you might find it helpful to draft a checklist of indicators as an aid to your due diligence process. As the scope and depth of your due diligence will be determined by your organisation's risk approach, risk appetite and circumstances, there is no single comprehensive checklist that you can adopt. If you do decide to use a checklist, then its purpose should be to prompt thinking of the areas that need to be covered, rather than used as a tick box exercise. Just because you can tick all the boxes in your checklist doesn't mean the scope of your due diligence is comprehensive or that it has been carried out adequately. Thank you for listening. Please Please do not forget to check out the free resources available as part of Charity Fraud Awareness Week. This includes several brand new help sheets. You can find these resources on the Fraud Advisory Panel website or by following #CharityFraudOut on Twitter. Thank you.